So I've been playing the newly released Super Meat Boy 3D, and as the title of the video suggests, I have some very conflicted feelings about this game. The reason being is that I am a massive fan of the original game. It ranks among my favourite games of all time, like it is probably my top 10, maybe my top 5 depending on the day. I love the original game to bits. So I would say that my expectations were pretty high going into Super Meat Boy 3D, but they kind of weren't. I kind of knew since the reveal trailer of the game that something was definitely off about Super Meat Boy 3D, and having played the demo a couple of months back, those feelings were kind of validated. You know, it wasn't some crushing blow of disappointment, I just had this feeling. I think Super Meat Boy 3D is an okay game. I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. I think the transition to 3D gameplay was done fairly well. It definitely has some problems, which I'll talk about soon, but I think it's important to state that overall I do like Meat Boy 3D because this video is going to be extremely critical of the game. Meat Boy 3D lacks a lot of heart and charm of the original 2D platformer, and it's pretty easy to see why. The original Super Meat Boy was lightning in a bottle. It was the work of two very talented people who put their heart, soul, and everything else they could give into developing a game, and it worked. And by everything, I mean the game was completely developed in just under 20 months, which, considering how well refined and how much content is in that game, is pretty insane. But Meat Boy 3D is missing one of the two creators of the original game. Edmund McMillen, who you may know as the creator of Binding of Isaac, The End is Nigh, and most recently Mugenics, a game that I'm now 100 hours deep into and there seems to be no end in sight. Something you can pinpoint as a strong suit of all the games that Edmund works on is his sense of humour, but most importantly a strong sense of depth to the games that he makes. And that is something that Super Meat Boy 3D feels like it is sorely lacking. So let's talk about it. So I think overall the gameplay in Super Meat Boy 3D is actually pretty decent. It has problems for sure, but it's solid, fun, and difficult, which is what Meat Boy should be. The controls are a lot floatier and looser than the original, but because the game is much more open, it does work. And I can definitely see the argument people have as to, you know, losing a bit of control in a series known for precision platforming. But 3D platformers are notoriously hard to get precision right, which is probably why double jumps exist in most 3D platformers and why the characters in Meat Boy 3D that have the double jump feel better to play. Unfortunately, Meat Boy himself doesn't have a double jump, but he does have two new abilities, that being the dash and the butt slam. I really like the dash. I think this fits in pretty well to Meat Boy's kit. The butt slam is okay. It's pretty much just a tool to ground yourself instantly instead of floating down, which is mostly used for saving time while speedrunning levels, and there's probably only a handful of times that you actually need to use it in the normal game. The rest of Meat Boy's kit is back. Jumping, wall jumping, and sprinting all feel pretty much how you'd expect, though I think it probably would have been better to have sprint always on by default because you pretty much use it for 95% of the game. There is the option for sprint to be always on and having the walk be toggleable, which just feels like it should have just all been on by default anyway. Also, speaking of which, if you're playing on a controller, which I suggest that you do while playing the game, turn off 45-degree snapping. No idea why this is on by default, just trust me, it feels much nicer to have that little bit more control over your character. From a control standpoint, I think the translation of Meat Boy gameplay into 3D is good, but I don't think that the game does a great job of tackling the new problems that arise when it comes to 3D platformers. The biggest problem in the game is definitely the camera, which the player has no control over, which leads to a lot of issues with depth perception. It is one of the biggest hurdles of the game, and it will contribute to a lot of deaths. I don't know why, but there are a few levels throughout the game that expect you to do wall jumps against walls that the camera is directly facing, which leaves a lot of guesswork to if Meat Boy is actually on the wall or not. You know, there are small tells like, you know, the little squish sound that he makes if he makes contact, or, you know, the blood smears on the wall, but these don't help if you're attempting to complete the levels under time pressure and you're only planning on spending half a second or maybe less on the wall. And I think one of the problems is that it's hard to see Meat Boy's animations. One of the first characters you unlock is Ed the Zombie from the Ben and Ed series, and because he is much taller, it is easier to see when he changes animations, and when the game expects you to be going really fast, these are the little things that kind of matter. A lot of the levels in the game play with 45-degree angles when it comes to the world design, which works really well and alleviates some of the camera issues when it is doing that, but then sometimes the game will just forget that and then throw in levels that don't work well at all with the camera and require just a lot of guesswork as to where you are versus some of the level geometry and the obstacles. Other than that, the level design is okay. A lot of the levels have a lot of big open spaces, but because it is all 3D world design, you can get stuck in weird places and die in some very strange ways. There are a few levels that have some pretty terrible flow, and by that I mean it's hard to tell where the level is actually heading without some major trial and error. It's Meat Boy, so dying and repeating isn't too much of a problem because of how fast it is to retry, but it is a problem that doesn't feel anywhere near as prominent in the original game. The structure of Meat Boy 3D is pretty similar to the original. We have 5 worlds, each with a selection of 15 levels each, and a boss at the end. Dark Worlds, A+ times, bandages as collectibles all make a return, although warp zones and glitch zones are noticeably absent from the game. There is a secret level in each world that will unlock a new character. Most of these secret levels kinda suck. Funnily enough, just like the original game, the kid from I Wanna Be the Guy is the most OP one that you can unlock, and I kinda do love that the level that unlocks him is pretty much ripped from the original game. In a way that it's a fun homage, less so that you actually have to complete it because it is a pain in the ass. These secret levels do have some fun little homages. There is a Mario 64 inspired level which was cool, and a Metal Gear one. I do kind of wish there was more of this. The other 2 secret levels are very shit. And I do wish that there were more homages to 3D platformers and games of this time, because there is a metric fuck ton of them, and it feels like this game is noticeably lacking in paying tribute to this era of games. The world navigation is done in a 3D hub world style now, which while nice, it takes marginally longer to navigate than the original. For no real reason other than it's just in 3D. Like, I'd be fine with this if there was anything that you could actually do here. There is nothing to find here, no secrets, no nothing. It's just longer map navigation for the sake of nothing, really. Also, the bosses in this game are pretty terrible. They are all way too quick, and apart from maybe boss 3, are all pretty easy. Though maybe I'd rather them be too easy rather than frustratingly hard, because I don't think that Meat Boy 3D's gameplay could probably stand up to scrutiny if the game was way too hard. And don't get me wrong, this game is difficult, but I wouldn't call it anywhere near as difficult as the original game. And I had this quote kind of swimming around my head while I was playing Super Meat Boy 3D. I can't remember where it comes from. It was definitely some other creator on YouTube that said something along the lines of, if a game expects perfection from me, then I expect perfection from it. The original Meat Boy game isn't perfect, but it is pretty damn close. Meat Boy 3D is not perfect, and it's not even close. And when this game does expect some kind of perfection from you, it can be frustrating, because half the time it feels like you can blame the game over yourself for not being solid enough built to beat it. And look, the gameplay in Super Meat Boy 3D is fine, but that's not the standard that I would expect coming from a sequel to one of the best 2D platformers of all time. So let's move on to the story. Super Meat Boy 3D's story follows a similar formula to the original game, just in a more glossy 3D rendered cutscene rather than the one made in Flash. The problem is that the cutscenes and the story in the game are missing a personality, and it's missing humour. The first cutscene in the game is the same one from the reveal trailer, just without any context as to what's happening. Yeah, this is just how the story starts in Meat Boy 3D. Whereas in the original game, we had an opening cutscene that explained the characters, their motivations. It's great. The story of the original game isn't complex or groundbreaking, but it does give you enough to care about what's happening, and 3D just doesn't do that. The argument could be made that if you played the original game, then you already know the deal with what's going on, so what's the point? And that is true to an extent. The thing is, you don't want someone's barrier to entry to play a game is to go and play an entirely different game. It's a standalone game, and you want every part of it to be able to stand by itself without having much or, too much prior context to be able to enjoy just jumping in here. The biggest point of comparison I can make is with the first boss in each of the games. The setup to the confrontation is almost identical. The first game has you come up on Dr. Fetus as he is burning down the forest, and you get this great little shot of Meat Boy looking shocked as he sees the forest begin to burn down. And then there is the reveal of the boss. And then it instantly transitions to the boss fight. In 3D, the cutscene starts with Meat Boy coming upon Dr. Fetus. The forest is already burning down. He has a stare down with Dr. Fetus before the boss reveal, and the cutscene cuts to black for 3 seconds before the boss fight begins. Now, I think this cutscene is good overall, although the 3 seconds of black screen is enough to make me feel a bit of a disconnect from the story to the game. It is missing the shot of Dr. Fetus burning down the forest himself, but you kind of get that idea that this is happening via environmental storytelling throughout the levels, which is actually pretty good. Where I'll give credit to Meat Boy 3D is that this game is able to get a good range of emotions and expressions out of Meat Boy and Bandage Girl. This cutscene is what I would call a good start. There's nothing terribly wrong with this. But it is the defeat cutscene where the problems really start to show. In the original, we see Dr. Fetus's contraption break, him getting frustrated, and then it pans to Meat Boy smiling and waving. And this is kind of critical because it shows us a bit of Meat Boy's character. It seems like he's genuinely a nice guy. And then Fetus jets off. And then we're left with a lingering shot of the destruction caused and this crying squirrel. This half-a-second decapitation right into chapter complete will always get a laugh out of me. It is timed to perfection. Now, compare this to 3D. Dr. Fetus's contraption falls, and then he jets off, and Meat Boy, due to debris coming down from the mech being defeated, is pushed down a mountain, and then he follows after Dr. Fetus. So what's missing here? There aren't any jokes. Maybe you can call the banana that comes off of Meat Boy's head, half a gag at best, but it's not funny and there's little to no character bits or anything. And that's the problem with pretty much every cutscene in Super Meat Boy 3D. There's a distinct lack of humor or real personality. In the original game, there was a joke, a gag, or some kind of homage in pretty much every cutscene in the game. And 3D also doesn't include any introductory cutscenes for guest characters like the original. When you enter a secret level, you just appear there without any context or what's going on. This does feel like I'm nitpicking a lot because the story and the cutscenes are such a small part of Meat Boy, but they are important to setting a tone, giving the game character and giving us a little reason to fall in love with the game. And while Super Meat Boy 3D can live without this stuff, it's why that no matter how good the rest of this game could be, it won't ever feel like a true Meat Boy sequel. Moving on to the art style of the game, I think the art is fine. It does lack a distinctive flair, and I wasn't really a fan of the art direction of a lot of the world themes. After the forest levels, the game becomes very dark and dingy. The forest level theme was okay, the wastes, I could take it or leave it. The futuristic level cities were kind of cool, but the rest of the game is pretty forgettable in tone. Like I said earlier, I think the cutscenes in the game have a nice look to them. There is some pretty decent animation going on, but there was one very over-the-top gory death that I thought was pretty ridiculously fun, and it did breathe a little bit of life back into the game. Meat Boy still leaves a trail of blood on the ground, which is a fun novelty in 3D because there is so much more space to spread it all around like an absolute sicko. Also, a neat little touch is that if you die a lot in levels, that he starts to become more beaten and bruised and kind of fucked up, which is cool. Also, there are a few levels that have a few visual gags here and there that I do appreciate. I just kind of wish there was a little bit more of it. Moving on to performance, Super Meat Boy 3D runs fairly well on my machine. Specs are on the screen. The game ran at an average 90 FPS throughout the entire run of the game, with some rises and some drops depending on the complexity and size of the levels, which maybe should be better considering it's not a very graphically impressive game. I don't think it's a worryingly bad performing video game. As for bugs, Meat Boy can get stuck in weird places just due to 3D geometry of objects and stuff like that. Some things that look like they are meant to be completely background objects are solid, and you'll probably lose a couple of lives from just hitting random objects. Also, a few levels have some insta-death spots which can feel somewhat inconsistent in where they're placed, but other than that, the game was pretty solid, no crashes and nothing that would brick the game that I ever came across. Moving on to Steam Deck, the game runs okay with some frame drops here and there. I did have to lower the graphics to mostly low to get a better and more stable frame rate on the deck. There is the option to launch the game in DirectX 11 or 12, and I found that it doesn't really make a difference on which one you choose. The game is playable but not optimal on Steam Deck, and I'd advise that because this game is a pretty intense game to play, this is something that will wear down your joysticks if you are a bit too rough with it. Moving on to music. So the music in Meat Boy 3D was made by Ridiculon, who have collaborated with both Edmund and Tommy a few times, most recently making the soundtrack for Mugenics, but they also composed the 2015 version of the soundtrack of the original Super Meat Boy game. Yeah, the original game has 2 soundtracks. We won't worry about that. I didn't really love the music in Meat Boy 3D. For me, it felt extremely generic. It's missing some strong riffs and melodies to really get into, and yeah, it feels like they struggled to find a tone to match the gameplay, which is super unfortunate because I generally like Ridiculon. The Mugenics soundtrack is extremely unique and fantastic, absolute A+ soundtrack. I really liked the End Is Nigh's soundtrack as well. This one just felt a bit of a swing and a miss. It's generic, it's not great. In conclusion, should you buy Super Meat Boy 3D? Well, the original Super Meat Boy is like $15 cheaper than this one and goes on sale for like pretty cheap regularly. And it has more content and is better refined. And so if you haven't somehow already played one of the best 2D platformers of all time, then you should definitely do so before playing this game. It might be unfair to compare the price of 3D to that, because there are 16 years worth of inflation to deal with and games are much more expensive to make. And this game wasn't the product of 2 people risking bankruptcy and putting themselves through an absolute grinder to make. But this is also a game with marginally less content than a 16-year-old game made by 2 people, so look, Super Meat Boy 3D is a good game, and for the price, I think it is just worth the money, but it doesn't offer anything that the first game did better, except for now that it is a 3D platformer rather than a 2D one. I have about 9.5 hours in Super Meat Boy 3D, and in that time I was able to complete every standard level in the game, A+ most of them, and complete about 60% of the Dark World levels, collect about 40 bandages. I'd wager I'm about 70%-ish into full completion. I'll probably make the effort to fully beat it because I really do like the game. If you go into this game with tempered expectations, you'll probably like it. The price is pretty worth it if you want to go through the effort of fully completing the game, you know, A+ing all the levels, bandages, unlocking all the characters, etc. It definitely doesn't quite have as much bang for your buck as you get from the original game. I think Super Meat Boy 3D's biggest failure is the lack of depth and hidden secrets within the game. I think the more open 3D environments could have been an opportunity to house secrets and, you know, ways to explore levels. There was an opportunity to have a whole bunch of new and fun homages to 3D platformers. And yeah, Meat Boy is just a lesser product compared to the original. It's still a good product, but it's a bit of a shit sequel. And that's all I have to say on Meat Boy 3D, so thank you so much for watching the video. Please leave it a like if you liked it and consider subscribing if you're new to the channel. Many thanks to my YouTube members whose continued support is always appreciated. And yeah, thanks again for watching. I will see you all again soon.